The climate is changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for: to empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress, to spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
Welcome to Change the Climate, the program dedicated to the efforts by the Citizens Climate Lobby and other groups to change the political climate to fight climate change. Today on this program, I have a backyard conversation with Tom Crawford, the president of the Thurston County Climate Action Team. And I asked him, how did that team begin? How did you start that?
Well, that's a pretty interesting story. I was invited by a investment guy that I was working with at the time. We both shared a real passion about the environment and a real concern about climate change. This was back in 2007, 2008. So one day he calls me up and says, hey, you know, there's going to be a meeting over at the Lacey City Hall, and some interesting folks are going to be there. Going to be talking about climate change and what we can do. Why don't you come on down? So I did. And it turned out I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing elected officials, and I'm seeing business people, and I'm seeing dyed-in-the-wool activists, and I'm seeing, you know, government people, and I'm seeing, you know, a variety of folks. And so I'm listening, you know, participating in the conversation, kind of listening to what's going on, and kind of a light bulb went on in my head and said, hey, this could be something that could really make a difference, because the right players seem to be in the room here that really, you know, have influence on the levers of how things work in our communities, and this could be pretty cool and pretty exciting. So that became Thurston Climate Action Team. And founding members were, you know, people who were at the time or since have joined city councils or county commissioners, some planners and education folks. Evergreen State College, you know, get involved, and so it was a variety of really great folks. So then that turned into actually a partnership with Economic Development Council to do some energy efficiency work. And that really hit on the theme that one of the themes that we were trying to emphasize was there's really no conflict between doing good environmental work and having a good, vibrant, healthy economy in the local community. So there's really no in fact, the two support one another. So that was another sort of unique thing about this organization, that some of the partnerships we were able to form.
So that's one of the goals of the Climate Action Team?
Is to build a healthy, vibrant community by, in fact, addressing this climate situation, this climate change challenge that we have in front of us. We think that's the way forward.
What are some of the actions that you've already taken or planning to take?
Well, as I mentioned, we formed a partnership with the Economic Development Council to take advantage of some federal funding that became available in 2008 and 2009 around clean energy and energy efficiency. And so we were able to get $1.5 million in federal grant money through Washington State University to promote energy efficiency in homes and locally owned businesses here in Thurston County. And so we helped the EDC hire staff, and we sort of provided an oversight role for the project. Met with the project director that was hired and some of their staff on a regular basis, and got involved in that work, and that ended up touching literally hundreds of homes throughout the county and several businesses, and actually saved more money and created more private investment in our communities than the original federal investment in the project.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. Yeah. So in this past April, there was a convention
Right.
at South
Puget
Sound Community College.
Right.
Could you tell me more about that? What happened there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this was actually the third convention on an annual basis that we've held. And the purpose of the convention was to bring folks together who are involved in one way or another in climate change or concerned about climate change, and learn more about new approaches and new things going on, and share notes and start to coalesce around some common goals. And this is part of a coordination grant that we recently got from a foundation in the Bay Area to work with organizations throughout Thurston County who are already, have already put their oar in the water around climate change to get things done, and want to do things. And so we think that we can be much more effective by coordinating our efforts, by coordinating our calendars, having some common projects and common goals, sharing, volunteer lists, and sharing information about what's going on, what some of the opportunities are for climate action in our communities. So this was the first kickoff effort around that coordination project. And so we had folks from the community and folks from outside the community. We had an exciting, our kickoff speaker was a 17-year-old student from the Seattle area who's part of a federal suit to raise the issue of the fact that one of the key rights of people is for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the children in our communities are not able to exercise that, are not going to be able to exercise that right in the future because of climate change. And so that was his message, and his message, and he talked very movingly about his story of how he got involved and how he was, eventually got involved in this suit, and some of the things he's doing. So that was we had 200 people show up, the biggest crowd we've ever had. We had, great workshops on anything from energy efficiency to solar to economic issues to the latest in federal or the latest in state initiatives around this. So it was a very exciting time.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's really great that there are teenagers who are getting involved with some of these issues now.
Yeah.
Especially, it's their world. It's going to be their world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, how can the local effort have effect on the national scene?
That's a really good question. In the 2015 Climate Summit in Paris, one of the big ahas and conclusions that came out of that was that local communities are absolutely essential to solving this climate change problem. And so, we see that even for countries at a national level that are taking a very forward-looking action, they're really depending on the leadership of local communities as well to complement their work, because as we know, this is where we live. This is where we actually live. And the other thing that we're finding out is that people feel much more engaged, and local elected officials tend to be much more accountable and responsive to the needs and the desires of local citizens than when you get up to the higher state and federal levels.
Yeah.
And so we're finding that that's an absolutely critical piece. And at the local level, we're finding that as we take on aggressive climate change targets, as we are starting to do here in Thurston County, and start to look realistically at what it's going to take to reach those targets, we're going to have to influence those higher levels of government to be able to do that. And we're also going to have to influence, in our case, Puget Sound Energy, to get them off of coal more quickly than they probably currently plan to do, and make sure that as they get off of coal and start to sell off and disinvest in their coal-fired power plants in Coal Strip, Montana, that they don't invest in other fossil fuel driven technologies, but they invest in clean energy, in renewable energy like solar and wind energy. So making those voices heard at a community level and in coalitions of communities, for example, all up and down I-5, communities are starting to come together and get that message to Puget Sound Energy and get that message to the state representatives. So that kind of partnership is quite important as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously you have a passion for this. Have you always been concerned with the environment, or was there something that happened in your past, or were you raised that way, or what can you say that was your inspiration to get you involved in it?
I think one of my inspirations goes back to my work with Native communities, back to 1968 when I was in college. I started working with Native communities and worked with them for like 10 or 12 years. And so one of the things that I've come to appreciate about their approach to things is it's a very long-term approach. And they're very aware and honoring of their elders and ancestors, and likewise they very much are aware of actions that are taken now influence future generations. I think there's a famous part of Native philosophy that's becoming more well known, the seventh generation approach, the seventh generation concept. That when I'm doing something now, I need to think about 7 generations in the future. And so that gave me an appreciation generally for the importance of the connection between human beings and the natural environment. And then about 10, 12 years ago, I was doing work in actually a little longer than that, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I was doing work in California, and I had the opportunity to get introduced to folks that were working on a concept, on a project called the Natural Step. And that talks about scientifically based limits on human activity, and that we really need to be aware that we can't forever continue to take things out of the ground and put them into our ecosphere or our natural environment here, our living biosphere that we live in and depend on. We can't keep doing that forever and ever, right? Because that's just following our own nest. And likewise, we can't continue systematically to create new stuff that really doesn't belong in the natural environment and spew it out into our nest. We can't continue to do that. And then the third principle is that we need to be respecting the biodiversity that's on our planet, and we can't continue to destroy our biodiversity and expect that we're going to survive. And the fourth principle is we need to do all these things in a just, fair, and equitable way, so that we can't say, okay, you in the southern hemisphere, you need to do all the work for sustainability, or we're going to dump all these things on you, right? And so that we can still remain comfortable and fat and happy here in the northern hemisphere, right? So we got to have an equity globally and within our nation as well, and how we do these things. So those principles were a big influence on me. So then the more I was doing some work, I did some consulting work for Climate Solutions, and that got me connected a little more directly to the climate issue and what that was all about, and I became passionate about it at that point. I saw it as a really important example of how this natural step concepts, those 4 concepts work. So I got more and more involved in it, and folks in the community were getting involved in it at the time, and so I just kept showing up, and they just kept giving me more things to do. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, that's the way it works. Isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So currently, you're trying to get signatures, right, for 1631?
We are,
Okay.
yeah, we're working on that. We're also, so that's an important statewide issue, and I would encourage people to get connected with that. We're also working really hard with 4 of the local cities and the county on an initiative to develop a regional, a countywide green climate action plan, climate mitigation plan. One of our goals for several years has been to work with local governments and work with local businesses to figure out the most effective ways we can bring down our local climate, or our local greenhouse gas emissions, or local carbon pollution.
Yeah.
And so this is a real milestone and a real positive step now that Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey, and Thurston County have agreed all to come together and do a common climate action plan. And they've just signed an interlocal agreement to do that, and they're now doing taking the initial steps to get that done. So we think that's very exciting. And so this carbon-free Thurston that we talked about earlier, that's the campaign around encouraging them to do a strong climate action plan with robust goals and targets, and with accountability behind it, so that people and folks in government and folks in the community are actually taking on accountability and responsibility for getting stuff done. So it's not just a plan that sits on the shelf that, oh yeah, that, those are nice targets, we'll get there someday, and we might do this and we might do that and we might do the other thing. No, Olympia, director of XYZ is going to do A, and Lacey, is going to do B, and Thurston County is going to do C, and they're going to do it by a certain time, and they're going to raise the money to get those things done. So that's what we're looking forward to, and we're really excited and hopeful about.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, okay, what is 1631?
So 1631 is a statewide initiative, was put together by the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy and a number of other organizations. And it calls for a fee on carbon, fossil fuels here in the state of Washington. And it calls for investing the proceeds from those fees into things like local renewable energy projects, such as what might be part of the Regional Climate Action Plan work, in clean forests work, in providing needed support for low-income communities and tribal communities, because we know that, when there's a fee structure put in place or a tax structure, particularly on consumption-oriented items, that low-income communities end up paying the largest part of their income, the large percentage of income to buy those goods and services. And so it's important to make sure that they have relief in this whole situation. So that's, in a nutshell, what 1631 is about.
And put it on the ballot.
And yes, and so what's needed right now, I don't know if TCAT, Thurston Climate Action Team, isn't exactly in the lead on this, but we're definitely supporting it. We're a member of the Alliance, and we definitely support it. And so what's needed right now is to get signatures. So if people are available to go out and gather signatures at Walmart or at Top Foods or the local grocery stores, or in the mall, if we can get into the malls, or wherever public space, at the farmers market, places like that, then that's what's really needed right now.
Yeah.
And so there's volunteers available, there's coordinators available to sign people up and get people going on that. And so we need to get those signatures, and so short time frame, just got a couple of months to get this done.
Yeah.
But we had really encouraging results this last weekend. We were out at the Arts Walk and the Procession of Species, and got a lot of signatures there, and a lot of signatures of other community organizations. So we're feeling pretty good about it. But we got to keep the activity going and keep the pressure on.
Yeah, I was one of those signatures.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Well, it's been great having you here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah. And we'll talk to you another. Good luck.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you for joining me. Join me next month when my guest will be Don Krug, an environmental economist. I'll also report on the 9th Annual Citizens Climate International Conference and Lobby Day in Washington, D.C., where hundreds of climate advocates will gather June 10th to keep Congress moving towards passage of carbon fee and dividend. There will be 2 days of training and workshops for our volunteers, followed by a day on Capitol Hill. Don't forget to sign the 1631 petition. It's an important step so that Washington leads the nation in fighting climate change. Join me next time on Change the Climate.
When I was a kid, the ozone layer was an issue. I don't remember how young I was or how old I was, but I remember being conscious of it as something that was talked about. You know, time goes on and it doesn't go on all that far before people are talking about global warming, and this becomes an issue, and it never really left my radar, I guess.
When I was younger, I always liked being outside. It was one of my favorite things to do. Go to different parks, explore different areas, try to see how many different wildlife species that I could see, and never realizing that being in nature could be related to protecting the environment. And until I was in college did I make that connection that this area, this world that I live in, which I enjoyed so much, was so important to protect.
You know, after I realized global warming was going to be a problem, I said, oh, all I have to do is tell my friends. Doesn't work that way. And I read something by Bill McKibben that basically said we need to have an organization here. We need to really tell everybody that it's a problem, and we need to be forthright about it. And about that time I said, well, I got to be part of a group.
I joined Citizens Climate Lobby in 2011. A year prior to that, I was what they call a climate change skeptic. But in the fall of 2010, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she had encouraged me to read the 4th Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which was released in 2007. And I sat down and read the entirety of the IPCC report. And I was struck by the abundant evidence that had been put together showing human causation of climate change.
I live in Manhattan, New York, and I was in my apartment during Hurricane Sandy. And while my area of Manhattan, the Upper West Side, was luckily not flooded, a lot of my friends who lived downtown had to vacate their apartments and their homes and find shelter elsewhere. I was unable to get to work. The subway systems were closed down for a week. We took in friends who had lived downtown and housed them in our apartment. I already knew about the effects of climate change, but that really hit home for me. And I think for a lot of people who hadn't been concerned about climate change before, once they lived through that superstorm, they really became concerned about it and now realize the effects that it can have on their lives.
I'm actually a letter carrier for the post office,
Okay.
But I'm also a part-time photographer, nature photographer, so I've done a lot of photography and seeing the firsthand effects of climate change through others' photography. Glacier National Park, my wife and I visited last year. It was an eye-opener for me that, you know, they used to say all the glaciers would be gone from Glacier National Park by 2050. Now it's down to 2020 that they're expecting all the glaciers to be gone.
My parents know there's a pastor of their church that actually lives up in Union Beach. And if you don't know the area or haven't heard, Superstorm Sandy, when it came through, Union Beach was one of the most devastated towns in the county, if not the state. compared to like Seaside Heights. Just in terms of per capita, Union Beach just got totally almost obliterated. So he lost his house there. So it hasn't really affected me personally. Obviously, living so close to the region, you get the effects from the environment as well.
After I got back from the June conference, I started reading and researching as much as I could. A CCL member recommended a book by Bill McKibben, and then I went online and looked for as many articles as I could find. I used an application called Zeit, and throughout the day, I'm getting articles about climate change.
I've been a Republican for the last 15 years. You know, I'm very concerned about the legacy that we're leaving for our children. I'm around young people all the time. Republicans think that addressing climate change means more regulation and more government. It doesn't have to. It's true it has in the past, but the whole point of fee and dividend is so that we can address climate change very effectively without having a bigger government.
What I've done for Citizens Climate Lobby is writing letters to the editor and visiting the local office of my congressman, as well as attending the conference in DC where we held 500 meetings with members of Congress and their staff. Citizens Climate Lobby has done a lot for me. I just love the monthly or international calls where we get to hear really top-notch speakers and hear the latest about what's going on with the science, the economics, the politics, the psychology of doing something about climate change. The message to me is, you don't know what will happen until you try. So just call your member of Congress, go visit their office, and things will happen.
Don't hesitate. There are so many brilliant people you will meet. There are so many great experiences you will have. And most importantly, you will be able to maximize your talents and you'll be able to accomplish things that you didn't even know you could accomplish. It is a way to sort of take your talents, whatever passions you have, and bring them to their fullest point to maximize your potential on behalf of the greatest cause that one could have, the cause of protecting future generations, to say nothing of the present generation from the ravages of the climate crisis. So do not hesitate. Join today, citizensclimatelobby.org.
We're not asking you to move mountains. We're asking you to join so that you can liberate your neighbor. To ask you the next question is, really, tell me more about that. I like CCL because they take a practical view on what is achievable, on making it simple, and on doing it in a positive way that isn't about griping, that's about engagement, it's about bringing people to the table, because it does the type of things that move a conversation forward that I would do if it was with a client of mine.